Hello everyone, welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. This week you've heard about ISIS and Iraq and Syria and Ukraine and Ebola and immigration and riots. And those are big stories with big consequences. But I just want to ask you, is the most sensational news the most important news? That's an important question because what we've been seeing is sensational. People breaking into stores and burning buildings near St. Louis. You can see that and hear that. It's visual. Soldiers quarantining people in Africa. That's dramatic. And even though the media has partially obscured the real truth of what's happening in Iraq, the coverage of ISIS and so on, we still see plenty of images of these Islamic terrorists holding their weapons and waving their black flags. Those events leave an impression on your sense of sight and your sense of sound. But what about the things that we don't see? Did the world see the 2008 financial crash coming? Did we see the factors that led up to World War II or the Holocaust? Did we see dramatic footage of America's cultural revolution on the nightly news? Not really. Here and there you catch a glimpse of these events for sure, but it's like a little outcropping of ice just poking above the water here and there. You have to look past the things that are easy to see. You have to go past the things that leave an impression on the senses. Otherwise, you'll never see what's beneath the surface. And especially in this case, it's what's beneath the surface that matters the most. So let's go beneath the surface and examine this trend. It's less sensational, it's less visible, it's less audible, but it is bigger and more dangerous than the iceberg that hit the Titanic. This is a massive trend, years in the making. And because it's a seismic event that involves millions of people, it's hard for people to see. It's gradual, but its ramifications are enormous. And by this point, it's not even quite so gradual. It's picking up speed. What are we talking about? We're talking about the rise of Germany. People are starting to recognize that Germany is one of the leading nations of the Western world, or the world for that matter. It's economically stable, already having the largest economy in Europe. It is the dominant political power in Europe. And now it has its sights set on building a European military force. Germany is in such a strong position that now the rest of Europe, and even much of the world, are actually pressuring Germany to become more powerful. World leaders are telling Berlin that it has the economy and the power to dominate. It now just seems like a fact of life that Germany is one of the most powerful nations in the world. It's hard to realize that the earth has moved under our feet. This is actually a seismic shift, not in terms of current events necessarily, but in terms of world history. And really, when you look at it historically, it's happened fast. Less than 70 years after World War II. Think about that. In 1945, what was the German economy like? It was literally in rubble. What was German political power like? Well, Germany's leaders were about to face trial for war crimes. How were Germans in general viewed? They were recognized as the perpetrators of 2 world wars. The news of their part in the Holocaust was being broadcast around the world. To be German in 1945 was to be part of a crushed, condemned pariah that was about to be cut in half by the Allies and the Russians. In the 1940s, who in the world would have said that the West Germans and the East Germans would become the leaders of Europe? Who would have predicted that Germany would unite and become the strongest economy in Europe? Well, actually, someone did predict that. Herbert W Armstrong. Herbert Armstrong said that Germany would lead Europe. And he specifically said that it would unite in a type of United States of Europe. He forecasted that 70 years ago. Because of what Mr. Armstrong forecasted, we've been monitoring this trend for decades. On the Key of David and in the Trumpet magazine, not a single month has gone by where we have not highlighted this trend. You can see many of the highlights behind me. What is happening with Germany has gone from a seismic shift to a landslide. It's about ready to become an avalanche. Once Germany unleashes its full power, how can it not? I mean, the Middle East is absolutely exploding. Russia is breathing down Eastern Europe's neck. And the only effort America is expending is to pull out. The world is calling for Germany to step up. And Germany is now ready to answer that call.
This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world.
And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
Last month on the Key of David program, my father talked about this growing rift between Germany and the United States, and how that since the end of World War II, really these two have been very strong allies, Germany kind of following America's lead. But as my father covered on that program, the straw that broke the camel's back was this ongoing spy scandal. All of these revelations about the United States spying on its supposed ally there in Germany. In that program, he quotes an article from the Los Angeles Times saying that this scandal has enraged the German public. The German people are upset. He also quoted Deutsche Welle, which said the U.S. has abdicated its responsibility as an umbrella of security and of dialogue. And so you see these tensions, which are causing the United States and Germany really to split apart more. And more broadly, as we were discussing in an editorial meeting here just the other day, really, when you look at so many of the hotspots around the world today, how much of it is attributed to America's shrinking influence? Well, you have to look at a number of these hotspots and see that these dangerous trends are really being brought on and accelerated by the decline of the United States. And of course, that's prophesied. We've talked to you so often before about prophecies in Leviticus 26 and elsewhere that talk about our decline and how that we're not going to pull ourselves out of this, grab ourselves by the bootstraps and come on out of these very difficult times that we're facing. Trillions of dollars in debt, a porous border down south, our problem in the cities. It doesn't take much these days, as we're seeing now in St. Louis, for a small event, seemingly, to spark a widespread riot. These things happen, it seems, every few weeks, every few days in some cases. Back in April, the Trumpet edition, the magazine edition, we featured the cover title, German leaders are ready to leave war guilt behind and to lead the world. See, together with those severing relations, well, at the same time, you're having the United States and other countries really urging Germany, as I said there at the top, urging them to take a more assertive, a more dominant role. And we saw that brought on all the more so after the downing of that passenger jet over Ukraine. As I said there in the monologue, with Putin's push toward Eastern Europe, it has the European nations scrambling to talk about a stronger unity, to talk about their defense, to talk about their military even. Hillary Clinton, you'll recall on one of our Trumpet Dailies, we quoted her, I think the day after that jet went down, where she was calling on Europe to take the lead in this. And in her comments, nowhere in that interview did she talk about what America needed to do. And certainly you don't see much of that coming from the current administration that she used to be a part of course. What should America do? More and more, the call is for Europe. This is from an article that Richard Palmer wrote July the 18th, just a couple of weeks ago. Part of the reason, this is referring to that interview Mrs. Clinton had, part of the reason she said Europe needs to lead the response is that it has not been as tough on Russia as America has. This is another example of America's desire to pass global leadership over to someone else. See, she was basically saying, as have others in the administration, that look, we've been the tough ones here, so it's time for us to pull back and it's time for you to impose tougher sanctions. And Europe has since done that. Mr. Palmer also wrote about that recently as well. It's still not as tough as it probably will be in the future, but still you can see the direction that we're heading. And you can see, as he brings out here, that it's just another case where the United States is wanting to pass the baton to someone else, where the United States is wanting Germany to take its place among the lead nations of the world, to step it up. Brad McDonald wrote an article just last week. We featured it on the Trumpet Weekly. Israel calls for German help in solving the Gaza conflict. Here's another hot spot where Israel, rather than pleading with the United States, rather than calling on America to get in there and help, its strongest ally for decades, instead you have Israel calling for Germany's intervention with help down around the Gaza border to uphold security there. This is from that article by Mr. McDonald just last week. It says Germany and the EU must dispatch inspectors. This is quoting from Avigdor Lieberman, the defense, I think he's the defense ministry official in Israel, Lieberman, who said Germany and the EU must dispatch inspectors to Gaza to monitor the Palestinians' trade with the neighboring countries, Lieberman said, and, quote, Germany should take responsibility as the leader of such a mission. The leader. Now remember, I mean, in Europe there's a so-called union, right? All these nations that are unified together, and he's not saying, look, we need Europe to come down. We need the European Union to come down and to take the lead. He's saying Germany specifically needs to take the lead. Germany has the responsibility here. He didn't leave any question as to who Israel believes ought to take the lead in Gaza. He said later in that same article, Germany, as the political lead nation in Europe, must play a pivotal role in the Gaza conflict. As I say, I mean, and we've pointed this out before, the shift away from the United States over to Europe. It's a mistake for Israel to do this, but you can look at the world today and certainly see why they would do it. I mean, the relationship between the United States and Israel is at an absolute low point. It's plummeting. And every incident or every hotspot or flash in the Middle East, every explosive event, it just pushes the two farther and farther apart. That's what we're seeing. Continuing from Mr. McDonald's article, he says, what is noteworthy and of major prophetic significance is that Israel this time did not turn to a multinational force or even to Europe in general. Lieberman's remarks clearly show that Israel's leaders are looking to Berlin as Europe's leader and decision maker and the nation they must trust and rely on. Now again, that may not seem shocking today, but as I said in the monologue, if you go back 70 years, that would have been shocking. Who would have urged Germany to do such a thing, to take that kind of a position? And in the grand scheme of things, in man's 6,000-year history on this earth, 70 years is just a short couple of generations, 2 or 3 generations. In that sense, it's moving very fast, even if a lot of these events seem to be moving slower because these seismic shifts are happening underneath the surface. Still, these are dramatic events. What a dramatic transformation we've seen, even with all of the violence in Iraq and the United States now returning, at least with a few bombs that we've dropped on those ISIS forces. Germany's showing support for that, and there, of course, I'm not saying Germany's going to take the lead role there in Iraq immediately, but just the calls again for Germany to be more active, more assertive, more involved. You're seeing it more and more, whether it's with Ukraine or Gaza or Iraq or elsewhere. And it's only going to intensify these requests, these admonitions. Mr. Palmer, writing again in the Trumpet, at the Trumpet website, talked about the German military, the European military. His article title was "Germany's Building a European Army Before Your Eyes." Did you know that? Do you realize this? That they're working right now to build a German army. They've entered agreement with the Dutch, the Netherlands, just recently, which basically absorbs the Dutch army into the German army. It gives the Germans control, and as Mr. Palmer brings out in his article, Poland's probably going to be next. What is happening? One nation after another that's just sort of coming right underneath that German influence, that German dominance. We've already seen it happen economically. And as it was happening several years ago with all of these failing economies in Europe and Germany swooping in to rescue those nations and to make them subservient in the process, we were telling you the next phase is going to be the military phase. And that's starting to happen. And the aggressive acts of Putin and other hotspots around the world, as I say, is only going to expedite that. Only going to speed things up. Mr. Palmer, in his article, quotes from Die Welt in Germany, the title being, "Germany is driving the European Army project." This is a project in Europe right now. And you can scoff and say, well, it's the beginning stages. It's nothing compared to the size of the U.S. military. But look at the direction. The military here in the United States is being hollowed out, even as Germany's driving this project in Europe. Germany's behind it. Talk about a seismic shift. Quoting from Mr. Palmer's article, he says, so far, financial pressures have been prompting Germany's neighbors to seek military cooperation. You see, for a time, we're unified politically, and to reduce some of the costs, we need to unify our military as well, all our military forces. The cost was driving it initially, but notice it says they can achieve the same bang for their fewer bucks by working together. But Russia's aggression in Ukraine is prompting another push. So now you have these other pushes. Now you have these other prods that are coming along and that are just, as I say, expediting this development. Germany's already working. I mean, it was working even before the Ukraine crisis. And now it's shifting into a higher gear. In his article here, Mr. Palmer quotes from the director of think tank Carnegie Europe, the institution's called. This is a quote from that within his article. It says, something is sprouting in Germany as Europeans ponder the necessity of military strength after Russia's annexation of Crimea and NATO charts its course for the post-Afghanistan era. Europe's reluctant central power is doing some serious soul-searching on its role as a military player. This reflective process started years ago when former Defense Minister Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg, we've had a lot to say about him over the years, started to set things straight by calling the war in Afghanistan a war and a fallen soldier a fallen soldier. I mean, just to call it a war was a pretty big step. It says things that things that had previously been taboo. But now, after those linguistic adaptations to reality, it seems that a more profound change is happening, one that might eventually lead to a shift in political behavior. As I said, we were showing you this months ago on the Trumpet, in the April edition specifically. Germany letting go of that history, that connection to World War II and the Holocaust and so on, and moving forward, being more assertive, flexing its muscle, building a military. That's what we see happening. Shifting over to Mr. McDonald's article, the one on Israel seeking German help. This is again from last week. Mr. McDonald says, watching Germany over the next few weeks and months will be fascinating. The nation, as we've reported, is a rising global power and is viewed with tremendous respect and admiration by most of the world. America and the West have no problem with Berlin assuming more responsibility, exerting more global leadership, and becoming more involved politically and militarily in the world's hotspots. In fact, they crave German leadership. Meanwhile, Germany, at least in word, has indicated that it's prepared to increasingly take on the role of global alpha dog, it says. Moreover, as the bevy of global crises, Gaza, Ukraine, Syria, Europe's financial crisis continues to intensify, the need for Berlin to intervene and lead intensifies. Look at all of these events that are converging right before us. Just because some of them lie beneath the surface, it doesn't mean they're not important or even sensational. They are. Those that have followed us for any number of years know that over the course of several decades, the signature prophecy of Herbert W Armstrong was the rise, the resurrection of Germany, the reunification of Germany as a nation, and the coming together of those 10 kings or 10 states in Europe, spearheaded by, led by Germany. One example of that, this is from the 1960s, a letter that used to go out with the Ambassador College Bible Correspondence course. We've quoted from this course a few times in the church history series there in the book of Revelation. Notice what they said to their subscribers or their students back in the 60s. We know, it says, how the United States of Europe will be used by Germany to attempt world domination. Prophecy shows 10 kings, 10 dictators will arise in Europe and give their power to Germany. On our YouTube channel, one of our most popular videos, Germany's Conquest of Europe. It was posted months ago, and it's still getting quite a few views each month. And a lot of the comments that come in are from people that are skeptical, that scoff, that say, oh, this is great, though, what Germany's doing, that their economy is so strong. Well, they should be leading. They should be. They should be more assertive. Look at what's happening to America. It's hard to argue with that. But what does prophecy say about this development? It's nothing against the German people specifically, but what does God say in Isaiah 10 and elsewhere about Him raising up the rod of the Assyrians to correct His wayward people? That's what we're seeing happen. It's very exciting in that sense because we're seeing prophecy fulfilled right before our eyes. And it's important for you to know where this is leading. This is a powerful booklet that we want to show you. He was right. This is by Herbert Armstrong, as you can see right here on the cover. He was right, and it, among other things, one of the central prophecies discussed in this powerful little booklet is this signature prophecy that I talked about just a moment ago. The reemergence, the rise of Germany right out of the heart of Europe. Something that was not even imaginable 6-7 decades ago. And now we're seeing it happen. There's that you can get at thetrumpet.com, or you can call the 800 number there on your screen, and our operators will send it out to you right away. And don't forget, I talked to you about Mr. McDonald's article featured on the Trumpet Weekly. This goes out every Friday afternoon to our email subscribers, some 26,000 of them, each Friday afternoon, pulling together all of the significant events, the stories, the news events of the week and helping you understand the real significance of these events that are happening in your world. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on the Trumpet Daily.